Hello, everyone. My name is Lindsay Shuck with Family Office Networks. Thank you for joining our FON webinar series today featuring Elevian. I'd like to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Mark Allen, co-founder and CEO. Mark is a medical doctor and successful serial entrepreneur. He has partnered with 3 Harvard professors and a team of drug development veterans to found Elevian.
Thank you, Lindsay, and welcome everybody. Thank you for your time to learn about Elevian. So 3 things that I want to get across to you today. Number 1 is that aging is malleable. It's subject to intervention, in fact, in both directions. So we can speed the rate at which we age, and we can also slow or even reverse the rate at which we age. Tremendous evidence for that. Number 2 is that a little known protein called GDF11 that we are working on impacts aging quite potently. And number 3, that Elevian, who has sole exclusive rights to the GDF11 pathway, is a great investment. So what is 50? I just turned 50 and I feel better than I've ever felt in my life. And when I was a teenager, this was 50. If you guys know who this is, Wilford Brimley, he starred in the movie Cocoon. And this is actually a picture of Wilford at the age of 50 when he starred in that movie. In that movie, Wilford and a number of other seniors they had Parkinson's disease and they got an alien power. And the greatest stunt that Wilford did during that movie was to jump off of a diving board after he'd gotten alien powers. Well, that's sad, but that's not what it has to be. With just a few lifestyle interventions, this is 50 today. This is Tom Cruise when he was 50. He's now in his mid 50s and still doing stunts in his own stunts in his movies. But what's 80? Unfortunately, 80 today is the average lifespan, and this is what many 80-year-olds look like, quite frail with many different chronic diseases. But again, this is not what it has to be. This is an alternative 80. This woman, Ernestine, this is a picture of her when she was 80. I think she's 82, 83 right now. When she was in her 40s, she looked in the mirror and saw somebody flabby staring back at her. She started to get into fitness and she won bodybuilding competitions in her 60s and 70s and still runs and leads a fitness clinic right now. So one very powerful way to intervene in the aging process is through these experiments called parabiosis. We've learned that blood factors can regulate the rate at which we age. So in this experimental model, old mice have their circulatory systems conjoined with young mice, and they're left together for a period of 4 weeks, blood flowing between the 2 organisms. Well, what we learn is that old mice exposed to young blood experience a biological reversal of aging across many different tissues and organs. Their hearts grow younger, their brains, their skeletal muscle, their bones. And interestingly, the young animals exposed to old blood have accelerated aging. It's not as prominent, but still quite significant. So, what is happening here? So, there are somehow circulating factors that are sending messages in both directions. So, from the young to the old to rejuvenate, to regenerate different tissues, and from the old to the young to somehow accelerate the aging process. So our one of our co-founders, Professor Amy Wagers, was on the very first team that published a Nature paper in 2005 working on this parabiosis model. And then while she was a postdoc at Stanford, she worked on this and then went to Harvard as a professor and continued work on this and recruited our other co-founders, Professors Lee Rubin and Rich Lee, to continue to study this parabiosis model and then to ask the question, which circulating factors might be responsible for these effects? They looked at how do circulating factors change in concentration with age. They use the best available technology, proteomics, metabolomics, lipidomics, transcriptomics. And out of that work, they discovered this little known protein called GDF11 that by many measures decreases with age. They estimated what it would take to replenish GDF11 to youthful levels via daily injections of the recombinant protein. And they did side by side studies looking at daily injections of GDF11 for 4 weeks alongside the parabiosis model. And much to everybody's surprise, they discovered that GDF11 can reproduce many of the effects of parabiosis, including rejuvenating the aged brain, the aged heart, and the aged skeletal muscle. So in the brain, GDF11 restores youthful patterns of vascularization. So that's one of the problems that we see with age is that our vasculature deteriorates. So it restores the quality and quantity of that vasculature. And secondarily to that, it, it stimulates new neuron production in certain areas of the brain. In the heart, GDF11 restores a youthful morphology of the heart. So as we grow older, our heart becomes thicker, pumping against a stiffer circulation. So this brings the heart back to a normal morphology. And in skeletal muscle, we all know that our skeletal muscle deteriorates and the rate of healing slows. Well, GDF11 brings that regenerative potential, the rate of healing to its youthful state in terms of speed of healing, and also improves a number of exercise physiology assays. So these studies were published in Cell and Science and were recognized as a top scientific breakthrough. So here are our co-founders, so three professors and a postdoc at the Harvard Stem Cell Institute. And I partnered with them and a group of drug development veterans to found and build Elevian. So we started the company in the middle of 2017. Going through some of the team, Tony Sandrasagra has about 25 years of leadership experience in drug development. The first 10 years in big pharma working on small molecules, and the last 15 years working in biotech on biologics, as we're working on today. Manisha Sinha did her postdoc in Professor Amy Wager's lab, where she was the first author on the paper studying and reporting the effects of GDF11 on skeletal muscle. She spent about 5 years in industry before joining us at Elevian. Orit Ford formerly was the head of antibody therapeutics at Stemcentrx, doing antibody drug conjugates for cancer, which was a 4 billion exit. Yangting Wang is one of the world's leading preclinical experts in stroke and also a protein biochemist, and joined us after reviewing one of the papers looking at the effects of GDF11 in stroke and coming to us as we were thinking on our own to focus on stroke and convincing us that we really should go after this area. So a few things about Elevian. We've raised about 9 million to date. We have 8 full-time employees that are all working out of the Harvard Life Lab in Allston, Massachusetts at the Harvard Business School campus. We have 4 contractors on our team and a number of world-class advisors. We have a number of research collaborations, both academic and industry, and we're currently raising a seed in A. The seed is nearly subscribed, and then we'll move on to an A, which will be sufficient to get us through our early clinical studies. This list at the bottom is a number of our institutional investors. So we have a number of investors already in the company, as well as family offices and high net worth individuals. So one of the unique things about Elevian is I mentioned so little was known about this protein GDF11 at the time of our founders' discoveries that they were able to file very broad patents around this GDF11 pathway. So we have patents claiming the use of the natural protein to treat a number of different age-related diseases, and then also compositions of new molecules, new ways to modulate GDF11 activity to treat different diseases. So, following the initial work from our co founders, our lab at Elevian and more than a dozen different independent labs have shown therapeutic benefit of GDF11 in the same dosage ranges across a large number of different age-related diseases. So really incredible the effects that we're seeing here and the potential with the same drug to treat and prevent many different diseases of aging and even ultimately to promote healthy aging and prevent these different diseases. So some of these diseases have COPD in the lungs. We were actually quite concerned about whether GDF11 having its effects in promoting the vasculature would cause cancer. Well, we're very pleased to report that there's no evidence of that. In fact, in a number of different interventional studies, GDF11 shows a tumor suppressive effect in many virulent forms of cancer. It shows effects in reversing liver failure, kidney failure, a number of different inflammatory diseases, inflammatory colitis and arthritis and psoriasis. It has skin anti-aging properties. Avon actually published a study in partnership with one of our co-founders showing it had one of the most prominent effects on anti-aging in the skin of anything that they've seen. And so this is really incredible that we see all of these different effects, but it raises the question of what are we going to focus on to get to market? Because each one of these different diseases requires its own clinical trials. So what we decided to focus on, we did actually quite a bit of studying of this, brought in consultants and looking at the available data, looking at the regulatory path, the clinical environment, the commercial environment. And we've selected two areas to focus on, the area of stroke recovery and the area of obesity, metabolic related obesity. The reason why is because these are both devastating diseases with very large addressable markets and unmet needs. So patients that are still quite in need today. And very importantly, we see effects with our drug in as little as a week in treating these kinds of patients. So I wanted to go into a bit more detail in each of these. So we're first going to focus on stroke. So stroke is really our lead program here. We're the furthest along in it. And stroke is a massive problem. Number two cause for death worldwide. 1 in 6 people will die of a stroke. And there are 650,000 ischemic strokes. Ischemic strokes are about 80% of strokes. About 20% of strokes are bleeds. And the only drugs to treat stroke, there's one drug and one device that eliminate the clots, and they must be given within the first 4 hours. Otherwise, they don't work. So because of timing and other contraindications, high blood pressure, history of bleeds, most patients don't get these drugs. Only single-digit percentage patients do. And 50% of the patients that even get these drugs go on and have ongoing long-term deficits. So as a result, stroke is the number one cause of long-term disability, both in the US and globally. So our co-founder, Lee Rubin, discovered the effects of GDF11 on the brain. And so it's going to share some of this data. So first of all, he discovered that GDF11 improves the brain vasculature. So initially, the quantity of the vasculature, which is what that slide shows. And later on, we've discovered also the quality of the vasculature. As I mentioned, secondary to that, we see neurogenesis in key areas of the brain. So these studies were published in Science and Nature Scientific Reports, and they were the basis for many different patent claims to use GDF11 to treat neurodegenerative and neurovascular diseases. So since our initial patent publications, a number of different independent groups have now helped to enable those patents by studying these effects in the area of stroke. So I'm going to share 3 different published studies. So all of these studies are looking at whether GDF11 can promote recovery after a stroke. So not in that early area, not eliminate the clot, but rather wait and see over time if it improves recovery. So all of these use an injury model where a stroke is induced in these mice or rats by occluding the middle cerebral artery. That's the most common location for a stroke in humans. And one of these studies is in young mice, one is in young rats, and one is in old mice. All 3 of these studies use the dose that was discovered by our co-founders, 0.1 milligram per kilogram per day. And they dose for between 5 to 7 days. And all of these discovered that GDF11 not only can in the stroke model, can reproduce mechanistically the improvements in vasculature and neurogenesis, but very significantly can promote this motor recovery. Now, in the young animal models, most of those animals survive the stroke injury. But in the old mice model, even in the hands of the best researchers in the world, there's a very high mortality rate. So in that model, they discovered that GDF11 also promotes survival. So this is a survival curve. So this bottom line in the curve shows without the use of GDF11, 40% of those animals die. But with GDF11, only 10% of the animals die. So that's really a quite significant effect, and that would be wonderful itself. But we want not only people to survive the strokes, but we want people to recover from those strokes and have much more limited deficits. So we have some very exciting motor function recovery data. So this is an example of one of the assays here. And in this assay, the top line shows a sham surgery. So this is normal function in the animals. The bottom line is a vehicle treated animal. So we're using the same vehicle that we put the drug in, and we're injecting that once daily, but there's no drug in it. And then the middle line shows with drug. So in this particular experiment, the treatment was started 7 days after the injury. And the treatment went on for 7 days, where you start to see a separation. By 28 days, that separation is significant. And by 42 days, there's no significant difference between the treated arm and the normal function. So this is the type of data that we see. So we have replicated this data now in the most stringent model. We see these effects. Not only that, but by altering the dosing, we can see prominent and significant effects so far in as little as 4 days. And as we're continuing to tweak, we may be able to see that in even shorter windows. So very exciting data to solve a very large unmet need. So while we have not yet begun our clinical trials, an independent group out of UCSF has studied protein levels in more than 2,000 different humans, two cohorts of about 1,000 each. So they have learned that looking at people over time, up to a 9-year study period, if you look at them at the beginning of that study period, and you divide their GDF11 levels into quartiles, that humans that have the lowest quartile level of GDF11 in their blood have significantly higher risk of disease and death compared to those that have higher levels. Now, this is very exciting data because you see that this looks almost like a dose response data. And this is just looking at natural protein levels in these people. But if you were to actually equate this out in the death, you have a 7-time higher risk of death over that 9-year study period if you have the lowest quartile compared to the highest quartile levels of GDF11. So really exciting to see this kind of human data, which you usually don't have in drug development. Now, what this tells us a couple of things. Number one is it tells us that our preclinical results in animals are more likely to translate into an effect in humans. But it also tells us something else important. It tells us that there is a physiological range of this protein in humans, and that dosing within this physiological range is more likely to be safe than some non-endogenous drug that we put into the body that the body's never seen. So I think that really improves our odds. We think that really improves our odds as a company. So we mentioned that the stroke recovery is really the first of many markets. It's a massive market. We've had a financial analysis done of the commercial opportunity within this market, but that's really the first of many applications of recombinant GDF11. And GDF11 is only the first of many drugs that we are already working on here at Elevian. So a word on diabetes and obesity. So again, this is an area that our co-founders discovered quite early, created some data, filed some patents quite early on this. And since that point in time, many different labs, including our own, have now published that GDF11 can promote what appears to be a healthy and durable weight loss. So some of the mechanistic data suggests that GDF11 is mimicking an effect of calorie restriction. So this durable weight loss, we see it occur in the first week of treatment, and we see it out durable past a month. That's as far as anybody's studied it so far. And this weight loss also includes an improvement in glucose metabolism. So this has now been studied and replicated over many different models of diet-induced obesity, genetic diabetes, so many different models, we're seeing this effect, and of course, a very large and exciting market opportunity. And what's crazy about this is the same dose of GDF11 produces these effects both in this area, in the area of stroke, and in many other areas. So uh, talk a little bit about our development plan. So right now, we're working on developing the molecule itself and proving its safety. So we have developed a scalable expression system with a proprietary CHO cell line. That's a mammalian cell line from a Chinese hamster ovary, where we've inserted the GDF11 gene and created a stable cell line that's now producing in sufficient quantities for all of our research needs. So we're planning to take that cell line later on this year, beginning of 2021, into a contract manufacturer that will scale up into clinical scale production for us. We need to take that drug from that audited process and run our IND enabling studies, our safety studies in animals, including a second species beyond mice. And then we can use that drug in our phase 1 safety studies, which we're planning now to conduct in Australia. Now, all of this work is synergistic across all of the different applications of disease. And so simultaneous to that, we are continuing to work on preclinical efficacy studies in a variety of different diseases. So the area of broad ischemic stroke is where we're furthest along. And then second to that, diabetes and obesity. We're also looking at a number of different orphan diseases, subsegments of stroke that may provide an even faster path to market. Now, ideally, we will have multiple different phase 2 interventional studies going on simultaneously, which will, of course, require a significant amount of capital in order to do. So I mentioned as we're working on this, we're working on discovery efforts in a number of different areas to therapeutically modulate levels of GDF11 using other drugs that can either have longer half-lives or be taken orally. So a word on some of the competition here, really this area of drugs that broadly target aging with the potential to treat a number of different age-related diseases. There are a number of companies. It's a very collaborative industry, I would say. We're friendly with these companies and wanted to just share some of the leading companies in the industry. Unity Biotech is a company that went public very early, still in preclinical stage. They are developing drugs that selectively kill senescent cells. So senescent cells are cells that stop dividing but don't die and release inflammatory factors. Their first drug is systemically toxic, so they're injecting it into the knee joint and showing some positive effects for osteoarthritis. So this just shows a very early stage company. Denali Therapeutics is focused on neurodegeneration, where Lee Rubin sits on the advisory board. They're in phase 1 and valued nearly $2 billion in market cap. And Samumed is perhaps the closest to us in terms of biologically what they're doing. They're also going after a circulating factor, a different one called Wnt, and Wnt increases with age, and they are selectively targeting Wnt with small molecules. They have 2 programs in late phase 2, one for male hair loss and one for osteoarthritis, and they are the world's highest valued private biotech company. So looking at these as examples of companies and trajectories where we might be, we're thinking of targeting going public ourselves after we have our early phase 2 data showing a positive proof of concept in humans in a 3 to 5 year time frame. So with that, I want to thank everybody and open it up to questions. My colleague, Sebastian Giwa want to introduce. He's our executive chairman, and he will be leading our questions.
How many labs have been studying these circulating blood factors, and is this, kind of a one-off, or is it broad?
Going back to that slide on parabiosis, we have here a list of the references. So this is something that has been studied in many different labs. So broadly reproduced. So I think there's no question in the scientific community that these effects are real and quite prominent. So we were the first group at Elevian to study what's the cause of these effects, to try to identify what blood factors are causing these effects, and identify GDF11 in that process. So now a number of different groups have followed that work and identified other blood factors that also change with age, that also have effects. But I have to say that GDF11 is by far the broadest in terms of its therapeutic effects in intervening and dosing GDF11. Some of the other molecules, the other blood factors that have been tried, for example, might only work in the brain or only work on skeletal muscle. So that's what's really unique about GDF11.
What is the way of delivery that's preferable in your business model?
So we have used in our animal studies both the equivalent of subcutaneous injections, so intraperitoneal, as well as IV injections, tail vein injections. So either of those will work clinically. And again, I think that this, because GDF11 requires injections, because it has a relatively short half-life, and all of our studies have used daily injections, it limits its application to very massive unmet needs, and ideally applications where we can do short treatment durations and treatment that can be overseen by a healthcare professional are really the optimal applications for this molecule. Now, we're already working on and have some molecules in the lab that have longer half-lives that could be injected far less frequently, and are also working on small molecules that could be taken as pills.
So just as a follow-up to that one, Mark, for instance, when it comes to stroke and humans, what type of, duration could we potentially be thinking about for the duration of the actual treatment?
Our most recent study showed a significant effect in a number of different assays of motor function recovery with only 4 days of treatment. We've shown on a window between 4 days and 14 days. And what we need to do now, and are just doing, is running these side by side to see where we see the maximum effect. And both the maximum recovery initially, as well as longer term, what's the maximum recovery that we think we can achieve. So would say that it probably would translate into that kind of window. We don't think it'd be more than about a couple of weeks of treatment.
So here's another question from Garth Smith. Maybe he joined late, but his question is, sorry, I may have missed it, but can you describe the lead therapeutic candidate that you're taking into IND-enabling studies?
Yeah, so the lead candidate is recombinant GDF11. So it's a recombinantly manufactured version of a natural protein, GDF11. And what's very powerful about this particular protein, so it circulates in incredibly low concentrations. It is 100% identical in its active domain, which is what we use as the drug, across all mammals. So it makes it a very convenient candidate to be able to test. We have developed cell lines to scalably manufacture this particular protein, which is quite a difficult feat to be able to properly do. It requires a sophisticated protein, requires a complex refolding. So that's our lead candidate. So we should note there that many of the world's leading drugs are recombinantly produced versions of natural proteins. So insulin, growth hormone, erythropoietin, and many others are in this same category.
Thank you, Mark. So Sam Merchant is asking a bit about the target market. So what's the size of it at the global scale?
We did a commercial assessment of this market for stroke recovery, looking at what starting from a very low penetration of that market and over time growing both in terms of the US and the global market. So in the pharma market, for most companies, it's 50% of the market in the US and the rest globally. Since we're really just starting in the US and won't be as far along, we've underestimated the global market. So this is looking at just stroke recovery, and this is looking at not the entire market. This is just a portion of the market that we are attacking now. Should note that there are no other drugs for stroke recovery. I mean, the only treatment is physical therapy at this time. So it's possible that it could be a lot bigger than this. And so this is just for stroke recovery. As you can imagine, the obesity market that I mentioned is an even larger market, although there are more options in that space. And ultimately, as we get to this kind of last stage, that basically drugs that can either be injected less frequently or taken orally, that opens up our market to many more diseases and ultimately to promote healthy aging, which is the biggest market of all. I do hesitant to talk about that or make any big claims because there's not a regulatory path. That would be an off-label use for many years because it'd be very, very hard to show in a preventative trial that GDF11 or any of these drugs can promote healthy aging. So that's really ultimately our vision, but it may take us many years to get there.
And maybe a few more words on that middle box, Mark. What are the candidates further out there? Once we have the first success and there is a lot of cash flow, what are the other potential indications for that middle box, even with the wild type natural protein?
Yeah, so talk about a couple. So first of all is the one that I mentioned, obesity. So we're seeing an effect in obesity in just a few days of treatment again, and that effect appears to be durable. So we've been building out a world-class group of advisors in there. It's such a big market that we'll need to partner. We're already starting to have some partnership conversations that are quite compelling. A lot of interest in that field. So that's an exciting potential application. Beyond that, there appears to be an effect in a number of different inflammatory diseases. So I mentioned inflammatory colitis, like ulcerative colitis, inflammatory arthritis, psoriasis. So all of those have drugs, but those drugs have severe side effects, and so there might be an opportunity for something else in that market. We're very early. It's just basically some early preclinical data there. So those are some where we think we could get away with short treatment durations and see an effect. So as soon as we have a long-acting version, then it starts to open up a world of additional applications. So applications in pulmonary disease, COPD, applications in heart disease, which is a huge population. So we actually I should say just to note. That even a single dose of GDF11 is showing an effect in promoting recovery after a heart attack. So it's really exciting. It could use that single dosage or very short treatment window. The issue there is that there are already a lot of drugs and good treatments post MI. It's well medically managed. So to get a new drug in there will take hundreds of millions of dollars and very long clinical trials looking at long-term endpoints because there are existing treatments. So it may be a potential application, but it's a tough and expensive one to bring to market.
We have another question. I think it came in when you partially afterwards answered it, but it's from Sam Merchant about how long would the daily injections go on. So maybe you've kind of explained that there are a lot of these indications where you only need to do it for a couple of days or maybe just a couple of weeks. In conditions like diabetes, would you want to explain a little bit how we might be able to cycle on or off, or what it could look like in those cases?
Each indication, there's probably a different dose optimization as we would say, in terms of exactly what dose and how often you would treat with. And one of the difficult things is that no matter how well we figure this out in a model species, it's not going to translate perfectly into humans. So we're going to have to figure it out again when we get into the human clinical trials. So, I can speak to the data that we have in the area of stroke recovery. The published studies showed of those three published studies. So one of them treated for 5 days, two of them treated for 7 days, all reporting significant effects out at 30 days after. Um, we just completed a study where we showed effects, significant effects in 4 days of treatment at a higher dose. So, um, so there's questions there. Um, you know, what would be optimal for patients. So we think that there's a range that just needs to be studied ultimately in humans. And part of how you design the clinical trials is, first you determine what's the safety range, and then in your phase 2 studies, you try different ranges in humans. So we'll just have to figure that out. But we think that it's probably in that, maybe a 3 day to 2 week kind of treatment range for stroke, and that's it. The recovery, what it appears to be, is once you achieve a certain level of recovery, you stay there. You don't deteriorate again. Maybe you'd have another stroke, deteriorate again, but you don't deteriorate again. And so that's stroke. In the area of diabetes and obesity, so now our labs and a number of other groups have published these effects that we see in as little as a week of treatment. Actually, it's reported and shown by us that even in an aged animal model, we see this weight loss effect. So very very prominent effects that we see, and we see that going out after a month. We don't know how much longer. We also see that we can prevent a weight gain in a high fat diet if we start them on GDF11. So again, it is yet to be understood in a patient, in humans that just behave differently, of course. How often would you have to treat? So what we think right now, looking at the data, is we could give a week of treatment and see a very significant weight loss, 15-20% order of magnitude weight loss in a patient. And the question is, can that then stimulate? I mean, if the patient has better behavior and can stimulate a better lifestyle, then great. If not, and they go back to their old ways, they're probably going to need another treatment. So it's lots of open questions in terms of exactly what the right treatment windows, durations, so forth, dosing are in humans.
A question from Ken Carpenter. How is Elevian's treatment protocol different than the GDF11 capsule sold by biotech brand RD Systems, R&D Systems?
Okay, so R&D is a research supplier of many different proteins, including GDF11. So their GDF11 is manufactured in E. coli cells, and their process is very expensive to manufacture. So when we were looking at manufacturing, we went and talked to the research grade protein suppliers like R&D and Peprotech to see if they could scale their production, and they can't. So E. coli doesn't have the machinery to properly refold this mammalian protein. So they have very lengthy and expensive, time-consuming refolding protocols. So it just can't be scaled. In addition, there's lots of misfoldings in their protein because of that issue. So that protein is not suitable for human consumption. It really is meant for research, and it's quite expensive to purchase for research. So as I mentioned, we have now producing protein, and the end product is identical. So it is the active domain of recombinant GDF11 molecule, and so it's identical, but our production system is orders of magnitude higher yield. and better purification, better refolding, so things like that.
Okay, I think we're done question-wise. Marco, do you want to maybe just share some reflections in summary?
Yeah, so want to thank you all very much. I think that this is a very exciting new way to intervene into aging. We have a relatively rapid path to the clinic and to the market. We have multiple shots on goal, many different applications of the same drug, very unique thing about this company, as well as many different molecules to target this pathway, although only one of them is getting ready to enter the clinic now. So some very, very exciting potential to really significantly improve the human condition and potential to make a lot of money in the process. So again, I want to thank you all very much for coming, and look forward to future discussions.
Thank you, Mark and Sebastian. Thank you to everyone that attended today's webinar. We will be following up with you individually, and at any point you have any questions for Mark, please reach out to us directly. We hope you have a great day, and we look forward to talking with you soon.